This is the Nike Airmax 1000, the first fully 3D printed sneaker from Nike and the world's first 3D printed sneaker with an actual air bubble inside. It could also be the best 3D printed sneaker ever made, but they do have some pretty tough competition with Puma just launching theirs, and of course Adidas, who's been in the 3D printing game for a very long time. So you already know how this pair of shoes released, and if you didn't catch the last video, it was basically a spin to win type thing that ComplexCon just exclusively. They had about 1,000 or so winners of this sneaker in total. Now, some of those winners got the pair of shoes on the day, very few, maybe a couple hundred. The rest of them all won this pair of shoes that would be made and then shipped out to them in like 6 months. So these haven't had a proper release where you could actually buy them. And to answer the question if that will ever be a thing in the future, I think so. A release hasn't been confirmed yet, but Nike has clearly invested a lot into the development of this sneaker with Zellerfeld. They went through countless different samples to finally come to this exact design, and to see that go to just a couple thousand people, I think there'll probably be a wider release. If that does happen, it'll probably take place next year, and in terms of a retail price, it will probably end up being $200 plus, just based off of previous Zellerfeld shoes and the 3D printed market in general. But of course, we're gonna have to wait and see. Now this sneaker, it feels like a huge response by Nike to all of the different people and blogs all saying that they're lacking innovation. Now they've got a new CEO who clearly wants to shake things up and is really taking things in a different direction. You know, if they were stuck in the retro phase, well, this is the complete opposite. And this is honestly the biggest leap in innovation that we've seen from Nike in many years. But is it enough to put them in the front in this specific category? Because like I said, they've had some competition. And I've been wearing and testing both Puma's fully 3D printed shoe and of course Adidas's. And it's all been pretty interesting how we had Puma release their pair of shoes with A$AP Rocky, and then straight after that we had Adidas release their first fully 3D printed shoe, and now we have Nike. And what's even more interesting is how different each of these shoes are, except for the main fact is that they're all fully 3D printed. So with all of these brands dropping their own 3D printed shoes, I guess the main question I want to ask, and I'm gonna need your guys' help for this, is 3D printed shoes actually the future of footwear, or is it just a gimmick that's gonna fade away into obscurity? Luckily enough, I've actually had the opportunity to try and test a bunch of different 3D printed shoes from a bunch of different brands over the past, and there's definitely some big pros and cons to all of these sneakers in the entire category. A lot of those pros and cons still exist with the Nike Air Max 1000. So let's start off with the basics. Why would you buy this pair of shoes over something that Nike would traditionally offer? Well, I think one of the first things I discovered wearing this pair of shoes, and I guess 3D printed shoes in general, is the comfort. Because these are completely printed with one singular material, a TPU, they are extremely soft and extremely squishy. Now, TPU is not exclusive to 3D printed shoes. It's something that's been used throughout the industry for a while now. In fact, even Adidas Ultra Boost, that cushioning that you know and you love, that's also TPU. But the benefit of using this material when it comes to 3D printing is that they can actually manipulate the different levels of softness and hardness throughout the entire shoe. So with the Nikes, you've got a really soft upper that almost feels like some kind of cushioned mesh, and then obviously it gets a little bit softer as the shoe goes down. And they've done this with such good precision, it feels like a traditional pair of shoes when it comes to the midsole. In fact, even if you feel the footbed of these things, it's a lot softer on the inside to kind of emulate or mimic an actual insole. If you feel the outsole or the traction pattern of this pair of shoes, it feels very similar to a regular pair of sneakers. Funnily enough, this pattern is something that is definitely got that Air Max 1 DNA in there. And that kind of goes for the entire design of this pair of shoes. It does have some of that Air Max 1 DNA in there. Obviously, this being the Air Max 1000, it's like a futuristic version. Now, one thing that does make a massive difference between this pair and other 3D printed shoes that I've tried is the air unit. It doesn't feel as soft and squishy as the rest of the shoe. In fact, it feels firmer around the heel than it does the forefoot of the shoe, which is a little bit counterintuitive. I guess we've all kind of been under the impression that Nike has always told us how soft air is. But at the end of the day, this is a cushioning technology from the 80s and 90s. And obviously, since then, we've had a lot of major improvements in different cushioning technologies, different foams, and obviously now 3D printing. So I think the air unit is definitely more of a visual thing rather than something that's actually going to be there for the softness of the shoe or just general performance. It does have a massive benefit when it comes to the visuals of this shoe. I think the air unit makes these things look so incredibly cool, especially in this all over black colorway where it just has this like neon green thing poking out of the back. Now, along with comfort, the next big pro to 3D printed shoes, and I guess another reason why you would opt to buy one of these things, is the durability. I've been wearing Zellerfeld shoes in the past. I did a 30-day wear test on one of the pairs. I burnt them, I drove over them with my car. Hell, I even threw those things into a lawnmower. And at the end of the wear test, they pretty much looked brand new, except for the giant slice that I made from the lawnmower. Point being, 3D printed shoes, or specifically these Nikes, are some of the most durable shoes that you could possibly buy. They also wear very well. Cleaning them is incredibly easy. You don't have to worry about this material getting wet. You can literally just throw them in the washing machine and they come out perfect. You don't have to buy specialist expensive cleaning kits to, you know, kind of take care of all of the different materials like leathers and suedes like you would have to do on a traditional sneaker. I personally found that to be like one of my favorite things about these shoes is like, you know, normally I have to spend a lot of time cleaning up all of my shoes after I wear them, mainly because I like always have them on display. And because all of them come with varying different materials that you kind of have to think about when you're cleaning them. If it's a fabric, you don't want to go too hard with a brush. But with these things, they are good to go. You can scrub them down, you can hose them off, you could use a pressure washer, you can throw them in the washing machine, and they're perfectly fine. Now, another potential reason why you would buy a 3D printed pair of shoes is the designs. Now, this extends beyond just this pair of Nikes, but what really makes 3D printed shoes so cool is that they don't have the same design restrictions that other shoes have. That's why shoes like the Marshmallows can exist. Those things could not be made with traditional materials. Even this pair of Nikes, to some extent, couldn't be made exactly like this with regular materials, although I will definitely say this is probably one of the most toned down designs. If you take a look at Zellerfeld's website, it gets pretty crazy. Point is, creatives can really go to town, and if you're someone who does like out there designs or wild stuff, then you can definitely find that with a 3D printed pair of shoes. So that's really where the pros end and the cons start. So the first, and I would say biggest problem when it comes to 3D printed shoes is the time it takes to make these things. I believe as of right now, it takes about 40 hours for one singular pair to be printed. And with a limited number of printers available, I think as of right now, if you were to order these things, depending on the demand, it's probably going to take anywhere between 6 to 9 months. Now, with these Nikes, because they partnered with Zellerfeld, and Zellerfeld offers custom fitted pairs of shoes, so you don't just order them on a website like I pick a size 10, you actually scan your feet and they custom print them to your exact foot. So at the event, the people that were winning the pairs, which they would be shipped out to them, they scanned their feet in order to get them custom made. And this hypothetically is a great thing, you know, every single pair being custom made for your exact feet, that makes so much sense. But it also slows down the process massively because a company can't just mass manufacture these things, it has to be by order. Now, this is something I believe only Zellerfeld and Nike has done, the custom printed shoes, whereas like if I ordered the Adidas pair, which I did, they literally just shipped it out. I picked up my size and that was it. However, there was still a pretty hefty pre-order on those Adidas shoes, so it still takes them a long time to make them, and that just is one of the limitations of 3D printed sneakers. And the next big con would be the price tag. As of right now, 3D printed shoes are generally more expensive than traditional sneakers. The Pumas were $250, and the Nikes would probably be a similar price tag, at least comparing them to other shoes that Zellerfeld has offered in the past. They're all pretty expensive. Now, the cheapest out of the three was the Adidas shoes, coming in at $140, which is actually pretty impressive. I guess technically it's the most simple design out of the three, but it also does use a different printing method, which has a lot of cons to it, but we'll get to that in a minute. Either way, the price point of 3D printed sneakers is definitely something that's going to restrict people from buying these shoes, and that's just something that, again, hopefully in the future will drop down. Now, the next con for this pair of shoes, which is actually something that I never really found an issue with until I started going around and letting people try these 3D printed shoes on. Because this material feels somewhat like a rubber or a foam, it's very grippy. So when you try and slide your feet into these things, it grips your socks and it ends up making the socks pull down on your foot, so it gets super tight around your toes. And that just ends up being really hard to adjust once your foot is in here. Now, you might have experienced this because it also happens with Yeezy slides and Yeezy foam runners. That's something that a lot of people have complained about. Personally, I never really had an issue with it, but some some people find it really annoying. And I guess a similar problem, which should probably be in the same category, but it's just the lack of adjustability when it comes to these things. Obviously, not having laces, it definitely makes them a little bit more adapt to just regular casual or lifestyle wear rather than performance, because you would probably need to tighten your shoes up. So those are the main pros and cons, but I think where this gets pretty damn interesting is when we start comparing all of these shoes. We've just had 3 of the biggest footwear brands on the planet all release fully 3D printed shoes at roughly the same time, and they are all individually extremely different. First off, my least favorite has to be the Pumas. These honestly feel like plastic rather than a soft, responsive foam like some of the other options. They have little to no cushioning underneath, so it does kind of feel like you're walking on plastic. And when you're wearing them, it kind of feels like more of a display piece rather than an actual pair of shoes that you can wear. They feel pretty brittle, and one thing I noticed as soon as I started putting them on my feet and started wearing them, this little section here where you slide your foot in, it looks like it's starting to crack, and that's just after trying them on, and it's only gotten worse as I've been wearing them around. Because these are spray painted, you can see a lot of the sections have started to chip, especially underneath. So yeah, overall, not really the biggest fan of these Pumas, especially for the price point. Now, the Adidas pair, on the other hand, is way better executed. The material is a lot softer and feels like something you can actually wear. The design is less impressive. It does kind of just look like socks on your feet. They do feel slightly brittle as well, but nowhere near as bad as the Pumas, but still kind of feels like something that wouldn't recover after being like stretched out. And I think after I got all of these shoes in, I assumed they were all going to be roughly the same, and I was so curious as to why they are so different, so I kind of just looked into it and did a bunch of research. And it turns out they're using different methods of 3D printing. So from my research, there's 3 different types. There's SLA 3D printing, SLS, and FDM 3D printing. SLA, or stereolithography, uses a liquid plastic or resin, then uses UV light to cure the liquid into a solid. Now, both Adidas and Puma use this method of printing. And as I was looking into it, there's some major downsides to it. I think one of the biggest problems I found was that because it uses UV light to cure this liquid into a solid, it essentially never stops curing. So wearing these outside in the sun, exposing them to UV rays, it will end up yellowing and cracking and becoming a lot more brittle over time. Another thing that I had no idea until I looked into it, but this method of 3D printing is particularly toxic. Now, I'm not going to go into it fully. I'll leave some links down in the description where you can read through all of the crazy sciencey stuff that they go into. But generally speaking, it can cause skin irritation, respiratory problems, and then just be generally toxic for the environment. Now, SLS is not as common as some of the other ones, but it is something that Puma did use when they did their collaboration with Botter. And that method basically uses a powder and then melts the little granules into a solid as well. And then finally you have FDM printing, which is what Nike uses, and Zellerfeld. This basically extrudes and melts a plastic through a nozzle, and I'm pretty sure all of these different methods are somewhat toxic, but from what I can tell, SLA and SLS are the worst ones. Overall, as a comparison between the Nikes, the Adidases, and the Pumas, the Nikes just feel like they're on another level. They're in another league in terms of what they've achieved here. Holding the Pumas and the Adidas shoes compared to these, it kind of feels like Adidas and Puma are using old technology.
This is absolutely, yeah. No, you showed me 3D printed sneakers that are way more advanced than this.
This design is a lot more complex. The fact that they're using different textures and different levels of firmness throughout the shoe, so it really does achieve something that is very practical and something you can wear every day. And I think as we start to see more and more brands make their own different versions of 3D printed shoes, I think more of them are going to choose Zellerfeld to manufacture them, just because this is such a feeling of like a finished product. But like I said at the beginning of the video, we need to answer the question, is 3D printed shoes really the future of footwear? Are we going to see them everywhere, or is this just a gimmick? Let me know what you think down in the comment section, and let me know what you think of the Nike Airmax 1000. Do you like these? Would you wear them? And if you want to check out the video of these things being launched at ComplexCon and going into all of that, just click that one right over there.